Welcome, everyone. So, have you ever just stared at a graded paper covered in red ink and thought to yourself, what is the actual point of all this testing? Well, today, we are handing you a VIP backstage pass to how the game of school really works. We're going to decode assessment, not as this stressful thing that just slaps a grade on you, but as a hidden, powerful tool that actively informs how your teacher teaches you and, more importantly, how you learn. Let's pull back the curtain.
I know, usually just hearing the word assessment triggers instant anxiety, right? We automatically think of scary letter grades, high-stakes final exams, and, stressful judgments. But I want you to step back and consider this fundamental question. Are we doing this to measure or to learn? Today, we are completely challenging the idea that assessments are just these final judgments meant to measure you against everyone else. What if they're actually the very engines designed to help you grow?
To hand you the rulebook to your own education, here is our quick syllabus for today. First, we'll hit on the true purpose of assessment. Second, the 3 distinct types you'll run into. Third, how these actually help your teacher teach. Fourth, how you can take charge of your own learning. And finally, we'll look at the new balance of assessments in modern classrooms. Let's dive right in.
Okay, Section 1, the purpose of assessment and making that crucial mindset shift. To actually make this shift, we have to stop thinking of tests as the absolute end of the road. We need to start seeing them as active tools carefully designed to help you understand exactly where you are and what you need to do next to succeed. Educational researcher Robert Stake offers this brilliantly sticky analogy for this. Read this with me. When the cook tastes the soup, that's formative. When the guests taste the soup, that's summative. Think about that for a second. When the cook is tasting the soup right there in the kitchen, they can still fix it. They can add salt or maybe a little more spice. They are checking their progress to improve the recipe. But when the guests taste it out in the dining room, it is done. That's the final judgment. School is exactly the same way. And trust me, you want to spend as much time as possible in the kitchen.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 3 distinct types of assessment.
So, classrooms actually operate on this kind of secret taxonomy of 3 distinct modes: assessment of, for, and as learning. Notice how the timing and the audience totally shift as we move across these categories. On the far left, we're judging outcomes at the very end, mostly for teachers and parents to look at. But as we move over to the right, to for and as learning, the timing shifts. It happens right in the middle of the learning process. And the audience shifts too. It moves away from those outside judges and puts the focus entirely on you, the student, figuring out how to improve your skills and build your independence.
Let's kick things off with the one you're probably the most familiar with: assessment of learning. This is the guest tasting the soup phase we just talked about. It's the final exam, the standardized test, that big end-of-unit project designed to measure achievement, compare you against the standards, and assign a final grade. Look, we all acknowledge the universal anxiety of summative assessment. It's formal, and it focuses purely on final results. But here's the secret. While it's definitely the most famous type of assessment, it is absolutely not the most useful for helping your brain actually learn.
Which brings us to Section 3, how assessment for learning actually helps your teacher teach. Now we're talking about informal check-ins during the learning process. It creates a literal chain reaction. So when your teacher gives you an exit ticket or asks a question out loud or gives you a quick mini-quiz that doesn't even count for a grade, it is not just busy work. Step 1, they are using it to identify your specific needs and gaps in understanding. Step 2, they take that real-time data to adapt their materials and resources. And Step 3, they differentiate their teaching strategies, literally tailoring the lesson directly to you. Your performance in the middle of a unit triggers exact real-time adjustments from your teacher. You're literally handing them the map they need to guide you to success. Okay, Section 4, taking charge of your learning. This is the absolute pinnacle, assessment AS learning.
This right here is where the training wheels totally come off. To really master assessment as learning, we need to introduce a magic word: metacognition. Basically, it is the regulatory process of thinking about your own thinking. It means you are personally monitoring what you're learning and then using that feedback to make active adjustments. You stop waiting passively for a teacher to come along and tell you if you're right or wrong. Instead, you step back and say, okay, what makes sense here? What am I still confused about? How does this fit with what I already know? You literally become the ultimate assessor of your own progress.
So what does metacognition actually look like in the real world? Well, here are some practical tools for assessment as learning. You might use learning journals to document your thought process as you go. You might use student-created rubrics, where you actually help define what a successful project looks like before you even start working on it. Use reflection logs or do peer feedback activities.
Highlighting these practical tools is super important because utilizing them does so much more than just get you an A in a class. It builds lifelong autonomy. It transforms you into a confident, self-directed learner who's ready to tackle literally any problem out there in the real world.
Finally, Section 5, the new assessment balance, and moving toward a continuous model.
Let's wrap up our explainer today by looking at how modern classrooms are evolving. Consider the traditional assessment model pyramid. Notice how incredibly bottom-heavy it is? In the past, schools relied almost entirely on that massive bottom layer, testing and assessment of learning. The whole system was basically set up to categorize and sort students at the very end of the line, leaving very little time left over at the top for actual reflection, helpful feedback, or self-monitoring.
But wow, look at this new setup. This brilliantly illustrates the paradigm shift that is finally putting you in the driver's seat. This is the reconfigured assessment pyramid. Look at how assessment as and for learning now take up the vast majority of the space. This is a system that actively prioritizes continuous, self-directed growth. It means spending way more of your time in the kitchen checking the soup, getting feedback, collaborating with your teacher, and monitoring your own progress. That final judgment, assessment of learning, is now just a tiny sliver at the very top.
Which brings us right to our conclusion. I want to leave you with this empowering question. How will you use your next assessment to grow? Because now that you have the Backstage Pass, you know that quizzes and reflections aren't just traps designed to catch you failing. No way. They are tools to inform your teacher and, much more importantly, to inform you. So stop waiting passively for a grade. Start treating every single assessment as a critical stepping stone to becoming a self-directed, lifelong learner. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.